afternoon. I tried to get up here before the applause ended. And that's better, thank you. Just not that fast anymore. There should be a word for that pause, that silence when someone's trotting up there. Well, thank you all for coming, especially, well, in any of these sessions, because I know I have a lot of competition. There's only one of me, and just, panels, there are three of them. And then there's, apparently there's an admiral and a general, and I'm like a sub-private or something, but I think if I want to get invited back, I'm going to maybe write a biography of Zachary Taylor or something, Yeah, presidential biography, that'll get me right in there. So I'm going to read some poems if we have time. Have a little session of maybe for questions at the end, but I'm just going to do some reading and talk about the poems. And I'm going to start with a poem that has an epigraph. That's a little phrase before the poem starts, not an epithet or an epigram. And Lucia of Clifton, like a lot of people, said these very confusing to tell which is which. You just call them the epithang. This is an epigraph. And it's by W.B. Yeats. Yeats wrote, not in a poem, but on somewhere, a poet never speaks directly as to someone at the breakfast table. He was not a big fan of breakfast. He also wrote, the poet is never that bundle of accident and incoherence that sits down to breakfast. This anti-breakfast thing here, something embarrassing about it. And then I was watching, you think I collect these things, and I do. I was watching the show Downton Abbey, and at one point Lord Grantham says, there's something foreign about high spirits at breakfast. So, I don't know. Anyway, so to go against that grain, the poem is called A Portrait of the Reader with a Bowl of Cereal. Every morning I sit across from you at the same small table, the sun all over the breakfast things, curve of a blue and white pitcher, a dish of berries, me in a sweatshirt, a robe, you invisible. Most days we are suspended over a deep pool of silence. I stare straight through you or look out the window at the garden, the powerful sky, a cloud passing behind a tree. There is no need to pass the toast, the pot of jam, or pour you a cup of tea, and I could hide behind the paper, rotate in its drum of calamitous news. But some days I may notice a little door swinging open in the morning air, and maybe the tea leaves of some dream will be stuck to the china slope of the hour. Then I will lean forward, elbows on the table, with something to tell you, and you will look up as usual, your spoon dripping milk, ready to listen. That's a thank you, pretty optimistic look at the reader. And here's a poem about a friend of mine who tried to teach me things about country living. He lived in Vermont. I lived in New York City. And when I'd go to the country, he'd teach me stuff like deer hunting. That was basically getting lost with a gun. And I did get lost with this gun. And I looked in my pocket, and it was getting dark, and it was snowing lightly. And I had an apple and a chocolate bar. And I ate both of them immediately. Just feeling depressed. So anyway, so this is something he tried to teach me about indoor life in Vermont. And it's called The Country. I wondered about you when you told me never to leave a box of wooden strike anywhere matches lying around the house because the mice might get into them and start a fire. But your face was absolutely straight when you twisted the lid down on the round tin where the matches, you said, are always stowed. Who could sleep that night? Who could whisk away the thought of the one unlikely mouse padding along a cold water pipe behind the floral wallpaper, gripping a single wooden match between the needles of his teeth. Who could not see him rounding a corner, the blue tip scratching against a rough-hewn beam, the sudden flare, and the creature, for one bright, shining moment, suddenly thrust ahead of his time. Out, mic went out, mic is back. Suddenly thrust ahead of his time, now a fire starter, now a torchbearer in a forgotten ritual, little brown druid illuminating some ancient night. And who could fail to notice, lit up in the blazing insulation, the tiny looks of wonderment on the faces of his fellow mice, one-time inhabitants of what once was your house in the country. This is a short 8-line poem based on an actual experience, a brief experience, but true, and it's called No Time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents lie buried side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then, all day long, I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. Now, you try to write a poem about your dead parents that makes people laugh. I'll give you a quarter. And here's this is a poem from a newer book, and it came out of reading Elizabeth Bishop's collected poems, and in there we have 2 poems facing each other. One is called Sleeping on the Ceiling, all right, and the other one's called Sleeping Standing Up. So I thought the only way to react to that was to go conservative. So the poem is called Sleeping on My Side. And it sort of evolves into a love poem. Sleeping on my side. Every night, no matter where I am, when I lie down, I turn my back on half the world. At home, it's the East I ignore, with its theaters and silverware, as I face the adventurous West. But when I'm out on the road in some hotel's room 213 or 402, I could be pointed anywhere. Yet I hardly care as long as you are there, facing the other way. So we are defended in all degrees, and my left ear is pressing down as if listening for hoofbeats in the ground. Here's a poem called, for you English majors, called Safe. Oh, there's a strange word in here. The word is snood. Snood? Woman's hairnet. Yeah. A lot of guys are wearing them today, long-haired guys, and I don't think they know they're called snoods. I think they've stopped wearing them as frequently or less self-conscious, more self-consciously. So it's called Safe Travels. Every time Gulliver travels into another chapter of Gulliver's Travels, I marvel at how well-traveled he is, despite his apparent incurable gullibility. I don't travel anymore because, for instance, I still don't know the difference between a bloke and a chap. And I'm embarrassed whenever I have to hold out a palm of loose coins to a cashier as if I were feeding a pigeon in the park. Like Proust, I see only trouble in store if I leave my room, which is not lined with cork, only sheets of wallpaper featuring orange flowers and little green vines. Of course, anytime I want, I can travel in my imagination, but only as far as Toronto, where some graduate students with goatees and snoods are translating my poems into Canadian. And here's one called, this is based on a question that, it's an unbidden question that comes up in our minds. And I think if we're, I don't know, if we're just ourselves, we don't want to think about it too long. And the question is, who goes first? And a friend of mine used to say he had dreams about which Everly brother went first. Anyway, this is called Me First. We often fly in the sky together, and we're always okay. There's our baggage now waiting for us on the carousel. And we drive lots of places in all manner of hectic traffic, yet here we are, pulling in the driveway again. So many opportunities to die together, but no meteor has hit our house. No tornado has lifted us into its funnel. The odds say then that one of us will go before the other, like heading off into a heavy snowstorm, leaving the other one behind to stand in the kitchen or lie on the bed under the fan. So why not let me, the older one, go first? I don't want to see you everywhere as I wait for the snow to stop before setting out with a crooked stick calling your name. Someone's got to go first. It's like the diving board at camp. The big diving board. Okay. And do you know, have you heard of Tennessee fainting goats? Well, if you haven't, you can Google them and watch them, I don't know, do their thing. It's not quite the right expression, but they're Tennessee fainting goats, and they fulfill all three parts of their names. And you can watch them. It's interesting and frightening at the same time. This is called Down on the Farm. Whenever the conversation turns to the subject of Tennessee fainting goats, the question that always comes up is why? Are they so squeamish that they faint like Victorian ladies whenever the farmer uses language on becoming a gentleman? Or is it catching, one goat fainting because he sees another one fainting? But that still leaves open the question of what makes the first goat faint. Does the memory of having keeled over one morning make one keel over again? Are they in love? Or is it all just too much? No one seems to know for sure, but it's something to think about when I'm trying to get to sleep at night, or when I'm looking out a window at the barn and the fenced-in pastures beyond. To see a goat stiffen before pitching over on its side with a thump is truly unnerving. But when he rises in a minute or two, as if from the dead, and goes back to munching with his head down in the sweet grass on these hillsides, then everything seems okay again, just like before. Again, if you don't believe me. So here are, Google it. Google, as in the South, they say, Google it up. You can Google it right up. Here's two poems about dogs. In both cases, we hear the dog's voice in the poem. This is a pretty short poem called A Dog on His Master. Dog thinking about his master. A dog on his master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7 to 1 is the ratio they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead, the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. Thank you for making that sound. That was good. Kind of a communal gasp. Okay, here's another very different dog poem called The Revenant. The Revenant is a ghost, right? A ghost that visits you. The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. Poor dog. All I ever wanted from you is food and water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Thank you. Well, here's a summertime poem. This is an amazing, I took my graduate degree at UC Riverside, so I know this weather at least part of the year, and it was amazing coming from New York to experience somewhere that there was no difference between indoors and outdoors. You know, usually you have to make preparations for both, but involving putting on and taking off clothes. This is a summertime poem, is what that reminded me of, and it's called The Lanyard. And the first stanza actually tells you the circumstances of how the poem got written. The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more sunnily into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one, if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim. And I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, Strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here I said, it's the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now as a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is a sonnet, and it's called The Golden Years, and this one got, I hate using the word inspired, but it got something started. Would be a better, when I was starting to notice that many of the signs around condo developments and gated communities had similar names, and usually involving an animal, like Beaver Hollow or Raccoon Dell or something like that. And it struck me, well, as I was driving past one of them, well, these are the animals that were banished from their habitat by this development, if they were there ever. So that added a kind of melancholy undertone to the spectacle of these places. It's called The Golden Years because it's in the voice of a widower of a certain age. The golden years. All I do these drawn-out days is sit in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge, where there are no pheasant to be seen, and last time I looked, no ridge. I could drive over to Quail Falls and spend the day there playing bridge, but the lack of a falls and the absence of quail would only remind me of Pheasant Ridge. I know a widow at Fox Run and another with a condo at Smoky Ledge. One of them smokes and neither can run. So I'll stick to the pledge I made to Midge. Who frightened the fox and bulldozed the ledge? I ask in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge. Thank you. And this is this poem is about a fashion back in the days, and many of you can remember this, when men wore hats to work, fedora hats, and it's called The Death of the Hat. Once every man wore a hat. In the ashen newsreels, the avenues of cities are broad rivers flowing with hats. The ballpark swelled with thousands of straw hats, brims and bands, rows of men smoking and cheering in shirt sleeves. Hats were the law. They went without saying. You noticed a man in a crowd without a hat. You bought them from Adams or Dobbs, who branded your initials in gold on the inside band. Trolleys crisscrossed the city. Steamships sailed in and out of the harbor. Men with hats gathered on the docks. There was a person to block your hat and a hat-checked girl to mind it while you had a drink or ate a steak with peas and a baked potato. In your office stood a hat rack. The day war was declared. Everyone in the street was wearing a hat, and they were wearing hats when a ship loaded with men and women sank in the icy sea. My father wore one to work every day and returned home carrying the evening paper, the winter chill radiating from his overcoat. But today we go bareheaded into the winter streets, stand hatless on frozen platforms. Today, the mailboxes on the roadside and the spruce trees behind the house wear cold white hats of snow. Mice scurry from the stone walls at night in their thin fur hats. to eat the bird seed that has spilled. And now my father, after a life of work, wears a hat of earth, and on top of that, a lighter one of cloud and sky, a hat of wind. Took a little turn there. Well, here's a poem that should appeal to all generations. It's called Forgetfulness, and I know I'm not getting any better at stuff like that, but I start the poem with something I think Patrick Susskind called literary amnesia, which is forgetting the stuff you've read. And I have mentally, I have a kind of a bookshelf, let's say it's about this long, but every time I read a new book, the other one at the end falls off. So the shelf remains the same size. So forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away, a state flower perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L as far as you can recall. Well, on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And here's a poem called, with the kind of uninspiring title of Cheerios. Not too long a poem, given the subject. Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios. For today, the newspaper announced, was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, whereas mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more enduring and noble are the hills, I surmised, as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. So that was a slightly revealing. I don't have an autobiographical persona, so you could read all my poems, and you can by visiting the bookstore first. And you wouldn't really find out much about me. I had parents, okay, and that's about it. I mean, I don't let other people into my poems. I want to be alone with the reader. That's the thing. And I tell my writing students, the more people you have in your poems, the less you are alone with the reader. And if you want to write about other people, why, I don't know, but you should write a novel, write a play, write a short story. So the next poem is, how is this leading up to the next poem? The next poem is called Only Child. So you know 2 things about me anyway. Or 3 things, I'm gonna die. That's another thing. But you knew that already. Yeah, and even when I'm reading poetry for contests or just teaching, and I tell them I have certain deal breakers. You know, if I come across, like I just stop reading, certain words will stop me from continuing. Like dad, I'm out. Grandma, particularly, boom, I just turn the page. Or cicada. I'm out. I'm sorry you had to say that, otherwise I would have finished your poem. It's an unjustifiable quirk, but there it is. Anyway, here's Only Child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling over territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister, a nurse I named Mary, who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from their house, and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were 2 of her favorite expressions. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we would sit and reminisce even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother looking out of Mary's right eye, and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child, a little prince and a loner, who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by mentioning her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. So, yeah. So there are some other people in my poems, but they're imaginary people. I'm okay writing about imaginary people. Being an only child is excellent preparation for being a poet, by the way. Yeah, because there's no other people around, so you don't develop an interest in them as much as you would normally. There you are. This is a poem, let's see, I'm going to just see this, we're running out of time here a little bit. Well, this is okay. So this is a poem that makes fun of the convention that started with Petrarch, probably, as developing of the love sonnet in Europe, and then it got imported into England and perfected by Shakespeare, but it still continues. And the convention was that male poets thought they could make headway with females by comparing them flatteringly to things in nature. Your eyes are like stars, etc. Shakespeare wrote, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun." You'd think that might have brought an end to it, because he punctures a hole and introduces realism into the sonnet, but it still continued. So I came across a poem that was just a number of comparisons to the female. The poem really had no traction of going anywhere but there. And I took the first 2 lines of that poem and started my poem, and kind of rewrote the poem for him. We do this in the community of poets often. They like rewrite each other's poems. No, we don't. So he starts like this, the way I start. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet, and the wine. Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh bird suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife, not to mention the crystal goblet and somehow the wine. So, you can see the only child in that one. So there's a we connection there. And here's a poem called The Trouble with Poetry. It's not that long, don't worry. It's just about one of the troubles with poetry. The trouble with poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world, and there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly, poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmarried band of thieves we are. Cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti. To be perfectly honest for a moment, the bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. All boys Catholic school, treacherous. And then I'm going to read one more regular-sized poem. I want to read a couple of poems from a new book that are very, very, very extremely short poems. And this poem is based on a comment in Aristotle's Poetics, where he divides plays and other things into a beginning, middle, and an end. Just, like we do this every day. It's, what was it? Truffaut, I think Truffaut, the filmmaker, said that, a film has a beginning, middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. So, throwing a screwdriver into everything. Anyway, so I thought I'd write a poem that had a beginning, middle, and an end, and follow the Aristotelian principles, and at least it would be tidy. As what Mary Oliver says, our poems should at least be tidy. So, and I call the poem Aristotle. This is the beginning. Almost anything can happen here. This is where you find the creation of light, a fish wriggling onto land, the first word of Paradise Lost on an empty page. Think of an egg, the letter A, a woman ironing on a bare stage as the heavy curtain rises. This is the very beginning. The first-person narrator introduces himself, tells us about his lineage. The mezzo-soprano stands in the wings. Here the climbers are studying a map or pulling on their long woolen socks. This is early on, years before the ark, dawn. The profile of an animal is being smeared on the wall of a cave, and you have not yet learned to crawl. This is the opening, the gambit, a pawn moving forward an inch. This is your first night with her, your first night without her. This is the first part, where the wheels begin to turn, where the elevator begins its ascent before the doors lurch apart. This is the middle. Things have had time to get complicated, messy, really. Nothing is simple anymore. Cities have sprouted up along the rivers, teeming with people at cross purposes, a million schemes, a million wild looks. Disappointment unshoulders his knapsack here and pitches his ragged tent. This is the sticky part, where the plot congeals, where the action suddenly reverses or swerves off in some outrageous direction. Here the narrator devotes a long paragraph to why Miriam does not want Edward's child. Someone hides a letter under a pillow. Here the aria rises to a pitch, a song of betrayal salted with revenge, and the climbing party is stuck on a ledge halfway up the mountain. This is the bridge, the painful modulation. This is the thick of things. So much is crowded into the middle. The guitars of Spain, piles of ripe avocados, Russian uniforms, noisy parties, lakeside kisses, arguments heard through a wall. Too much to name, too much to think about. And this is the end. The car running out of road, the river losing its name in an ocean, the long nose of the photographed horse touching the white electronic line. This is the colophon, the last elephant of the parade, the empty wheelchair, and pigeons floating down in the evening. Here the stage is littered with bodies. The narrator leads the characters to their cells, and the climbers are in their graves. It is me hitting the period and you closing the book. It is Sylvia Plath in the kitchen and St. Clement with an anchor around his neck. This is the final bit, thinning away to nothing. This is the end, according to Aristotle. What we have all been waiting for, what everything comes down to, the destination we cannot help imagining, a streak of light in the sky, a hat on a peg, and outside the cabin, falling leaves. Thank you. We have just a minute or so, and I wanted to just give you a sampling of this new book, Musical Tables, sort of based on musical chairs, only there's no music and nowhere to sit down, and it's plus the furniture gets in the way, it's unplayable. But so I'll give you just a few of these, and they're very, very, I mean, they're 2, 3, 4 lines. So here's one called, it's 3 a.m. Only my hand is asleep, but it's a start. See? You're so easy. All right. Carbon dating. Carbon dating. He tried it once as a last resort, but most of the women were 1,000,000 years old. Okay, I've got to give you something more serious. So here's one, just 4 lines, called Divorce. No more heavy ball, just the sound of the dragged chain with every other step. Yeah, see? Kind of cool you people down a little bit. And this one, I'll read two more. This one, believe it or not, the title is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Trouble was not his middle name. And then finally, and thank you for being a great audience. And, I don't know, with all the generals and historians, I thought like 3 people would show up, but you've been a great audience. So the last one is called Children. There's a new movie out titled Children. I don't know what it's about, but I like the voice on the radio when it says, children now playing everywhere. Thank you so much.